Commissioners Board work session. It is Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. It is 3:02 p.m. We're in Building 1, room 280. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel or join by calling 360-252-9020, pin number 1234. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. Vice Chair Ty Mincer joining us via Zoom. Commissioner Gary Edwards in the boardroom, as well as County Manager Ramiro Chavez and Assistant County Manager Robin Canwell, as well as Director of Public Works Jennifer Walker. Today we will be discussing Thurston County Lakes Funding Allocation Overview, and it's going to be an informational session. So Tim, should I hand it off to you? Or
I'm going to open it up and then
Jennifer.
he will be doing the heavy lift today. So I went back, we're here to talk about the $10,000 allocation for the lakes. And I went back and I watched the budget deliberation. And it was on October 28th at about minute 53 and lasted until the break. But I re-listened to that because there was a lot of discussion about what that money was for. And through all of that, ultimately what it came down to was a support for, under the budget request that we provided at the request of the board, the $5,000 bond being by the proposers, and then additional costs in excess of that amount to help with answering questions for funding for establishing an LMD. And so just wanted to go back and just restate, I listened to that, here's what the purpose was, and then we're gonna talk about here's what we've done. We've got an account of the money, that the bond for Patterson Lake, what we've spent, and then we also have the $10,000 and the funds that we have spent and what our deliverables have been out of that and in support. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're here to give an update on the $10,000 allocation, and then we can also talk about the portion of the bond or deposit that the Patterson community put forward, where we are with that. So again, the board approved $10,000 for 2022. What we have done with that, to date, we are in the process of developing what we're calling a Healthy Lakes program. So to kind of back up where we were prior to 2022, staff would receive a lot of requests for technical assistance or requests for guidance from communities regarding lake issues, not necessarily lake management issues, but lake issues. We didn't have a process for a fund to appropriately charge to and go out and provide that technical service. We often found a way to do it, but we didn't have a vehicle for that. So what we have done with our website to start with, there was very old information. The website was very antiquated. It did not provide good technical assistance for communities. It didn't provide good guidance on communities that would want to organize. We took that down. We've been building new content with the Healthy Lakes program kind of being an umbrella for lakes, the management of lakes in Thurston County. So we're developing information for a community that isn't interested at this point in farming, but may have some general questions about lakes. So we're trying to provide that information for them. We are then also developing content for communities who are interested perhaps in organizing and want to learn more about that. We're talking about the different organizational structures that are available, including LMDs and special districts, as well as some others. Some basic information about what that looks like, what each organizational structure looks like, and what how that may fit with their community. And then we're beginning with the lake management districts and providing content for them to make decisions if they choose to move forward with what a lake management district would look like. What we put FAQs, I think we put 5 pages of frequently asked questions regarding lake management districts up there. We've established administrative rules. Those are now on the website as well. We have also used some of the $10,000 allocation to begin hosting open houses for communities that want to form. So last week, as an example, we had a 2-hour Zoom meeting for the Patterson Lake community, the Offutt Lake community petitioners that we wanted to walk through the information and make sure, and part of this was a request from the board to make sure that roles and responsibilities were established, that expectations were set, and that they had good information. So we had a very good meeting last week. That information, in the interest of transparency, will be put out on the web so that communities can refer back to that information as well. So that is where we are at this point. We're continuing to develop good content, open house meetings, and ways to communicate with the communities. What that has cost so far, out of the $10,000 allocation, as of the last information that was pulled, we had spent about $2,200 of that. So about $7,800 left. And we continue to build content and information so that if a community wants to look at forming, there is good information out there so that they can be informed if that should go to a vote of the community. I want to talk a little bit about Patterson LMD right now and their bond. So they, as you are well aware, submitted a petition December of 2021. Along with that, they submitted a $5,000 bond or a $5,000 deposit that established a fund which, per our common practices, we then bill against to evaluate that petition, make sure we can report out to the board that it either has or has not met the obligations of the RCWs and whether it's ready to move forward. We would typically then utilize that funding to take that petition through the process. So to date, where we are, we've spent $2,372 of that $5,000, and we are to the point at which you were briefed on April 20th and given the PowerPoint about the petition and about the process that's related to the formation of a lake management district, and that is where we stopped. So that is where we are with the $10,000 allocation. What we've spent so far, there's roughly $7,800 left. There is also some information within the handout that you have about identified gaps, resource gaps, if LMD should be considered. We would definitely want to talk about that, and I know that's a question that's been raised by the board, as well as timeline and some other information. So with that, I would open it up to questions.
Okay, questions, Commissioner Edwards?
Well, I kind of hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have recently talked with Paula Lowe, Gary Whitley, and then a fellow from Lawrence Lake and Long Lake. And to a person, I'm getting that they don't feel they've ever had a very good meeting. So that doesn't match Now, you have a different perspective on it, for sure. And they feel that we, the county, are doing everything we can to discourage the formation of a lake management district, which is exactly contrary to what the legislature wanted when it developed the RCW that allowed this. They specifically recognize that government cannot do this alone. They need the help of these groups. And I'm hoping that there's going to be a pretty good presentation brought forward by some of the lakes management folks, but they are very unhappy. And that is the best way that I can put it, and maybe the politest way that I can put it. They don't feel they've had any meaningful input. And there's new rules that have come out that have been relayed to them that, oh, these new rules, they're all put together. The county commissioners said they want new rules on how these changes are gonna be, and you don't get to have any input into it. So this is gonna be pretty harsh on you, Tim. And I've been a manager before that I've had to be harsh with employees. Now, there's always two sides to every story. And I would like to see if we couldn't turn this around, because we're talking 4,000 or 5,000 citizens out there that are very unhappy because they don't think the county is working towards their best interest. And that's unfortunate. I like to think we try to do the best we can for our citizens. Now, how that can be rectified, I don't know that this is the right format. I don't know, are these meetings, do we record these so they can watch them, or?
They're watching it.
They're watching it now.
It's streamed.
So I'm sure they may have some comments that come in, but I feel real uncomfortable having to be the bearer of bad news, but it just has not went over well. And I've oftentimes had to talk like this as a manager when I'm working with folks that are possibly thinking they're doing good. And, you know, we've had very good meetings. I can't find one person that'll agree with you on that out there. So I know we're kind of putting you on the spot on that regard. I tried to get some briefing, you know, from some folks, and that's what I heard back this afternoon.
No, understood. I could certainly forward on some emails that are contrary to that following the meeting that thanked us for having the meeting. And again, the meeting, as soon as our communications person gets back, will be posted online for transparency. I would recommend that we have additional meetings with the community, and if they're, based on that feedback, if there is additional information that we can provide, I would certainly welcome that, and I think would be a lot of benefit in that. When we were, and the administrative rules as well were shared. They will be shared with the current lake management districts on June 1st. I've set up a meeting to talk to them about that, and the reason for that is the LMD administrative rules. The newer conditions of the LMD rules wouldn't immediately affect them. This would be a point for them to consider at the point when they re-up as an LMD in 2 or 3 years. And that was out of respect for the way in which they were formed last time. When the LMD administrative rules were first considered, they were considered in 2018 as a communication package and a roles and responsibilities that was the response to identified risks to the county. And some of those risks to the county, I think you've been copied on recently, letters to some of the community members where their actions are, in our opinion, putting the county at risk. So they are an attempt to address that. And I would share that most of the items in the administrative rules, which I have copies here as well, are items that are not new to the committees. They have been shared in some cases repeatedly with the committees. And by and large, the majority of the participants on the committee understand and respect them. Others don't. And when we have committee members that are engaged with contractors who are applying herbicides or contacting regulatory agencies to try to influence our applications of those herbicides, or things of that nature, it's very important from my perspective to have that information shared in a manner that is in writing and is transparent and is available to them. So, because leaving that to verbal communication has not worked for us. When we tried in 2018 to develop communication plans, because we needed to set forth a framework to engage the communities so that we could get what we need from them to develop a work plan and a work program and information for budget development and a framework for how that would work and how that would align with our budget development process and those types of things. They were given back to us, and they were given back to us with we are not going to comply with this. So that leaves us in a position where we are trying to manage as best we can these communities in a way that is acceptable to them, but also minimizes the risk to the county. And to be honest, we're struggling with that. And we've been struggling with that for a couple of decades now.
Could I ask a follow-up, ma'am?
Yes.
I think the most recent example that, and I brought it up just briefly, and that's that $17,000 item that I brought up over the last week or something. I don't have all the particulars, but boy, has that stuck in everybody's craw. About last year during budget time, apparently the county knew they were going to take $17,000 out of that fund. That was never relayed to the county commissioners, and it was never relayed to the Lakes folks until that happened. And it kind of comes back to, I don't know who's right or wrong, but the lack of communication seems to compound the problem. And so that kind of being the last straw, if you will, about the community's feeling that we were trying to help. They just don't feel that we're trying to help them solve a problem. And I guess what I would encourage the board to think about is allow this to settle down. Let's not make any rash decisions about anything while emotions might run high or anything. Let's think about this and think about 4,000 or 5,000 people on these lakes that are very unhappy. Now, I'm embellishing. I didn't talk to 4,000 or 5,000
I was going to say, wow, you're
I'm
pretty
really
quick.
with it, right?
You
No,
have 5,000
but I talked to
phone calls.
their representatives, and they're very unhappy. So I'm not here to assign blame at this point in time, because I've been through this many times where there's two sides to every story. But when I keep hearing the same story, it kind of piques my interest, and I want to get to the bottom of it. And this too, I would like to get to the bottom of. And I think it's our obligation as the elected officials for these folks that we at least let them air their grievance about why they feel this way. I haven't been in attendance of any of these meetings. I purposely have stayed away from all of them, trying to let it work without being the micromanager, just to see how it goes. That hasn't been successful in this case. I don't know if it would have been any different had I participated. Probably would have been worse. I don't know. But I would ask that maybe we not make any rash decisions and see if we can't come up to a process that can be laid out so these citizens can have some recourse, at least in their grievance, if you will.
Could I
Just a quick follow-up,
Sure.
if I may. I appreciate that, there's always two sides of every story. And I appreciate that, you making mention of that, Commissioner. But I would encourage the board is to perhaps to allow to listen to both sides of the story.
Yes.
And make your own determinations because, it is difficult to always be on the defense. And that's what I believe the staff has continued to be always on the defense. Related to the lake management districts, there is a role the county plays. And the administrative rules is to try to agree on what that role is. Because it's not just about the role of a county employee to just take direction from a lake management district association. There is a role the county plays, and Tim has a large responsibility to avoid the county taking unnecessary risks with this partnership. Because it appears that, there is always an option of a special use district. In the special use district, they can go do about the same, and they be the owners of their own destiny in a way. So similar to the Black Lake.
That hasn't worked out too good, I might point out.
Well, it is,
Just saying.
but there's always a perspective.
Yeah, I know.
On if you talk to the Black Lake Special District, the majority agreeing that's the best way, So the only thing that I encourage the board is there is always two sides in every story. That please listen to the two sides before making a judgment.
I believe you're right on target, sir. I really do.
Thank you for that. I would love to speak really briefly to the trust and transparency issue that continues to come up. And I just want to speak to that a little bit. And first of all, just to make the board aware that there are some community members that you're very aware of that are very committed to these communities and very vocal. And my experience is a little bit different because I do also hear from the community members that are dissatisfied. Not with the county, but with those vocal members. What we have done is we've gone out to steering committee members for both lakes and set up regular meetings that occur every other Friday in my office to talk about trust and transparency and to try to understand their perspectives and for them to try to understand the county's position and our goal of minimizing risk and managing these effectively. So there's some very good things happening there. I want to speak to trust and transparency because it was brought up in Mr. Carmen's letter yesterday. And then there was a steering committee meeting last night, and I am on the agenda at my request, to address this at the next meeting because we try very hard to be trustful and we try very hard to be transparent. And an example of that is the information that's going up on the website and the work to engage these communities and try to understand. Being transparent isn't always saying yes, and we're going to have to truly manage the communities sometimes, and that's the position we are in based upon basically 2 decades of the communities being allowed to operate as a bit of a hybrid. So a little bit under the special district mandate and a little bit under the RCWs. The question of the IT charge has come up two or three times, and I've spoke to both committees about that directly. But if the board is interested, I would I would love to share my perspective on that because it is the result of the county trying to be more efficient and in the long run, saving these communities money. And a lot of the right questions were asked before we went down this road. And they're right, that they weren't made aware because it wasn't part of the budget process. And the way that this worked out, we expected to see benefit immediately, and then the charges for IT hit the budgets 2 years down the road. So if there was anything to communicate to the committees, we certainly would have. But in this case, there wasn't, and it deserves a longer conversation and description. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that at any point.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Can I get Commissioner Commissioner Menser, I apologize.
Yeah, I think we need to address all of that at a different time because there's a lot of detail, and we've got enough to chew on here just with the first two sets of issues. I mean, Commissioner Edwards, I'm going to hope that you're embellishing on what you've heard, because for you to say that the feeling of the groups is that the county's doing everything it can to discourage lake management districts when we have subsidized, over $20,000 the last 2 years is just incredible. If that's the true feeling, and this is the last straw on their willingness to believe the county wants to work with them, I don't know what to say to that. Find that incredibly disappointing. And on Ramiro's point, about the partnership, that's what I'm struggling with, because, you say nobody thought it was a good meeting. Well, I'm looking at Mr. Carmen's attachment of what he would like us to send to the staff. And it says, number 3 is that we should direct that the Lake Management Steering Committee are the voice of the members, and therefore their decisions on budgets and any and all other subjects are binding on staff, unless we, the board, has decided otherwise, or it's contrary to law. That doesn't sound like the partnership that we have. So if that's the expectation of the districts, then it's not surprising. I don't think we're ever going to have a quote unquote good meeting, because we're not on the same page about what this whole relationship is. And that's where I go to the last point about Black Lake. I mean, you made a joke, it's not working too well. I think it's working great. They formed a district. They don't have to deal with Thurston County non-transparent staff. They do basically the same activity program. They pay no interfund costs. Sounds like it's working out awesome for Black Lake. And I don't understand if there's going to be this constant war, and I'm of course I'm embellishing, it's not a war, but if there's this constant dialogue and mistrust, I think that's a fair characterization. Why wouldn't they want to be a special district? So they don't have to worry about, they don't have to direct the board to direct staff that their opinions are binding. They would be binding. They'd have their own commissioners. Their commissioners' decisions would be binding. But that's not what a lake management district is, unless I've got it wrong. But if I've got it right, then the attitude that's reflected in this attachment kind of shows why we have a problem. And that's what I thought the whole process of coming up with administrative kind of roles and responsibilities was about. And before we can even get there, we've got people coming in saying, pushing back, and we're not being given input, and this is, okay, we want them to have input. I'm responsive to that. But I don't know. I don't have any answers, and I'm not mad at anyone. I'm frustrated because it feels like we've tried, we try to be responsive, and we've worked through this, and we all have different opinions, and we've worked through the subsidy issue, and we did that for 2 years, and we're going to try to keep doing that. And now we've got 2 more districts forming, and people alleging that I got input that there was good meeting about the information. A couple ladies emailed me and said, we understand. They wanted me to know that county had made them very clear about the ins and outs and the goods and the bads, and they still wanted to move forward with their petition. Thanks for the information. That didn't sound like anybody was upset or felt they were being, not treated appropriately in the meeting. So I'm just not sure. I don't, and again, this whole IT thing, I don't know anything about it. So I can get into that. But I mean, I know we're the Board of County Commissioners and we may not see the same, and I'll watch this meeting, I guess, if it's posted. I mean, Tim's tone and manner and professionalism has always been, to me, just like to a fault. I mean, there's been times where I've kind of wanted Tim to show a little emotion or a little opinion. He's always so measured and appropriate and professional. It's just hard for me to believe that he's acting in any other way. I mean, I'll watch the meeting if it's posted for me to watch, but I'm having trouble believing that.
I think I'll keep it kind of my initial thoughts when the petition was first presented to us, is the same thought I have now. We keep hearing this same frustration. Commissioner Edwards just laid it out, this frustration about LMDs and working with the county and how difficult the county is. And for me, this doesn't make me want to have two other LMDs who are going to be complaining about the same thing, about how, the county's doing this and the county's doing that. And every time I've checked in with Tim or with Paula about the LMDs and what they're doing, it seems pretty on track. Nothing that makes me distrust that they're not trying to work with the two LMDs that are currently set. And so, I've heard, that the meeting went well as well, but, I've heard also that, Patterson, from some lake owners, that they expect that, they want the interfund cost covered as well. And so I just have a lot of concerns. I guess I'll go back to the $10,000 allocation we initially did. And I feel like it should be spent with that same method. I would like to see kind of a plan on moving forward. And if we could take it out from that 10,000, that would be great, because right now I don't feel warm and fuzzy about two other LMDs like coming on board. Just because, we keep hearing every month from the two LMDs, either through public hearing or through emails or through something, about how the county's doing something wrong. And I don't know what the solution is. I'm frustrated.
Good conversation, commissioners. Never is easy to make some difficult decisions as we move along. I think this is good information for you to weigh in what staff has presented. I will coordinate a follow-up conversation, and maybe in the follow-up conversation we can dive into the comments that Mr. Carmen made related to the IT, and that's what you're referring to, the 17,000.
I believe so.
Yeah, so we'll dive into what happens related to that and see where it goes. And at that point, maybe I will ask the board what it would like to consider the next steps on the Patterson Lake petition. I don't think today is an appropriate time to ask you that.
Commissioner Mattenser, you have your hand up.
Yes, one of the things I asked about last time, and it might be something we can address today since we have a little more time, is what it would take to launch these two new LMDs. I saw in the handout from staff that the estimate is like a half an FTE per LMD. And I'm wondering how that fits into current public works staffing, how much of a budget ask is that on top of all of the new subsidies and all of the new IT costs and whatever else we're being asked to pay for. I'd like to know kind of what does the finances look like, because that factors into everything else.
What we can tell you is that we do not currently have the resources to bring on an additional LMD without dropping some initiatives. So as an example, our aquatic resource specialist we entered into a bit of a pilot program about 3 years ago in which we found some noxious weed projects for her to do in order to reduce costs to the LMDs. And so we've been operating under that model. So our Deschutes River invasive knotweed removal project and our Chehalis River Eladia removal project, which are longstanding projects in which the county has a lot of time and money vested, are being managed by our aquatic resource specialists. So in the absence of new staff, we wouldn't be able to take on an additional LMD. The costs for that half FTE, I would have to get back to you on.
Probably what, about 40,000 a year for half an FTE, roughly?
I'm
Just a
guessing at
rough
least, yeah.
40 to 50,000, probably not 50, fully
With
loaded.
benefits, fully loaded.
Fully
50.
loaded with the benefits.
Can't argue with that.
That's a rough order of magnitude.
And then how does it work? I mean, in terms of the way it used to work, the way it currently works, and the way Long Lake folks are proposing that it works in terms of how that person's time is allocated. I mean, I saw something, I read Mr. Carmen saying really quickly, and there was some stuff in there about how he would like to see, like the supervisory time, he said, never gets charged, and frontline, on the ground worker, like absolutely minimized, except in certain situations. And so I'm wondering, like right now, is if Paul is the equivalent of that person, is her, how much of her time, what's the strategy by which her time gets billed out to whom?
So it depends, it depends on the work plan that's developed for the LMDs, and they're somewhat different, and we expect that any new LMDs would be a little bit different too. So the range is, I believe, 0.45 of Paula's time, 45% of her time is allocated out to Long Lake. 15% of her time is allocated to Lake Lawrence. I will say as kind of a caveat, that was again part of this pilot program that was done 3 years ago, and the expectation is that those numbers will probably inch up slightly based on the work plans. So 60% of her time at this point is for the management of the 2 LMDs. The rest is supporting noxious weed projects. In addition to Paula's time, there is a certain proportion of our financial services time that is charged with paying bills and paying the employee. A certain amount of my time, I think it's 2% of my time that's budgeted to the LMDs.
You
So
could spend more than that.
Probably.
And I
have
charge
a lot
no
to say about it.
time to
You
them.
charge no time, and you spend time on the LMD's issue as well.
The 2% that is for me personally was budgeted with the hopes 3 years ago that under the new structure that they would be somewhat easy to manage, and that is not worked out. So
I will add that supervisory time, allocation of like financial services time inside of the department. Those are overhead costs that, like countywide interfund costs, must be allocated in a fair and equitable manner in accordance with state law. So if the board should choose to not bill this fund for appropriately allocated overhead, and we use best practices in cost allocation, then you must choose to pay for it out of the general fund.
So if you just to finish up my point, so what you're saying, just like, let's say Patterson and Offutt form, then we would hire someone, but then half of their time would be charged to the fees collected from, or the whatever you want to call it, rates collected from Offutt Lake residents and half to Patterson? Is that what you're envisioning? So like, or is that how I read your
I think that
memo?
will be the impact.
Yes.
Yes, that would be the impact.
So financially, it's really paid, I mean, it's not necessarily that part's not costing the county because we would be charging those two lake management districts.
As part of
We'd
the
hire-
charges, yeah, but how much money they will potentially generate as part of the fees and charges versus, and that is a financial conversation that the members will have to weigh in.
Well, yeah,
But right now-
you wouldn't set up a fee structure that did not completely cover the county's
Right.
costs.
And that is part of the consideration when staff comes to the board with the petition. Part of what we have to attest to is that they have created a budget that would support those costs, including interfund costs.
Overhead and indirect.
Right.
And how do we get around, like, so Lawrence Lake's only paying 15% of an FTE. I understand that work plans might differ, but do we really expect Lawrence Lake's work plan to be less than a third of the staffing requirement as Offutt or Patterson? Or is that going to be a problem?
Lawrence Lake's work plan 3 years ago was developed on almost a hands-off approach for management, managing a nuisance vegetation contract and very little else.
Okay.
So we took our best estimate as far as what is the minimum amount we could charge them. That number was 15%. What we have learned since then is that is probably incorrect and that we will need to adjust that.
It's not adequate.
It's not adequate.
It's not adequate for the level of service.
Yeah.
Because in public works also, just as a reminder, we're charging our time, whatever work we're doing, we have restricted funds, and so we have to have an ability, and we're putting our time in half-hour, quarter-hour increments, depending on what it is that we're working on. And so, but for the $10,000 that we received, we weren't charging anything for this development of the Healthy Lakes. It didn't exist, so.
And it has to be billed somewhere to, as Jennifer said, a restricted fund. And if you're gonna bill a restricted fund, there's gotta be benefit to that fund. And Public Works, until this money came into play, didn't have a general fund option. All their funds were restricted funds.
Go ahead, Commissioner Arwood, sorry.
From my perspective, if we're serious about water quality in our lakes, and consequently, I suppose, groundwater, I have no problem with spending money out of, say, the general fund, and I watch the general fund pretty close. But if water quality is going to be a priority of the board, I think it's worth the expenditure. And then if you compare us in Thurston County to the other lakes around the state that have been part of that comparison schedule, we're one of the very few that don't contribute to solving the water quality problem in that jurisdiction or in their individual jurisdictions. So if we have to spend some money, I think it's money well spent. Now, what the amount is, I don't have the answer to that. But I can tell you for many years, this whole lakes management program functioned. I don't know, I'm a longtime member of the community, never heard anything about it. It seemed to work okay. At some point, and if I have to defend Tim, I might say that sometime back when we went to direct cost allocation, maybe around 16 or something, does that sound like that was, or recovery? Was that about the right point in time that happened?
Then what happened?
The recovery of all costs so that nothing came out of general fund.
Well, I don't think,
It seems
to
that-
my recollection, there wasn't general fund support before. I think there was some stormwater funding support support early on.
At some point, there was a change though, and that's kind of about the time things
The
started to sour.
Yeah, the LMDs have been handed over time, if you look back through the history, they have been handed from department to department, which if you kind of dig into it, is because of some of the difficulties in managing them. So they've been handed from department to department. I think they came to Public Works in 2015, if memory serves, where they were directed to be self-supportive and pay their own internal costs. In 2016, the staffing costs to the two LMDs was, I believe, if memory serves, 1.51 FTEs that was being utilized to support the LMDs. Since then, we have, in an effort to reduce our costs, we have found a way to do that for about half of that staffing cost. I think we're at about 0.7 something now. So we have, and their budgets were in the red going into 2016. So we've made a lot of changes. You're right, I think the interfund costs started hitting them maybe upon the transition to Public Works, and I'd have to look back to see if that's accurate, but that's my recollection.
That's just my recollection,
2015.
something like that. So maybe that clash of policy issues, you know, could have contributed to the problem, but
Sure.
I just think we ought to kind of review it, and I would hope maybe my seatmates will be able to talk to some of these folks, see what they've got to say themselves. And you can probably talk to new people that maybe you've never even talked to before. I'd be kind of curious myself what those less vocal people might have to say, so.
Well, we have received public testimony in Patterson Lake for somebody who is opposed to this
Oh, yeah.
and consecutive.
I thought he was happy now because we didn't do a charge
He's out of
when he was signed, huh?
He thinks he's out of it.
Yeah, he thinks, yeah, there you go.
We did not draw that
Yeah,
line.
exactly, thank you.
The county did
So
not
if he
do
was
that.
thanking the board or the county had nothing to do. What happened is he asked for the documents for the petition, which included the map, and then at that time he realized
He
his
found out
property
they
was
weren't
not
trying to
included.
charge you.
So the county didn't do
Yeah.
anything because of his testimony, just to be clear, thank you.
Commissioner Menzer? I'm sorry,
No,
are you
no,
done?
I'm.
I got caught up in Commissioner Edwards' comments, and I kind of missed the whole first issue really, which is this $10,000, what it's for, the $5,000 bond that Patterson put up. So I heard Jennifer say at the top of the hour that the $10,000 bond was for the $5,000. The $10,000 allocation in the budget was for the $5,000 bond plus additional costs. Is that not what you said?
No, I apologize if I misspoke. The $10,000 was in addition to, there was the $5,000 bond that the communities would pay, and this was to support the specifically covering exploration formation costs in excess of the bond amount.
And that's, so we're good there, right? We're doing what, in your opinion, we're
Yes.
doing with the money what we
Yes.
decided to do with the money. We've taken the bond from Patterson. That's appropriate because we didn't say we were going to fund the bond. We're then helping them with all costs above 5,000 to whatever that might look like. They've only you said 2,300 so far. But if there's costs above 5,000, we'll cover those with the remainder. But then you're saying we also need $5,000 to $8,000 more for our Healthy Lakes program. Is that all correct?
Well, and in the beginning, we said we were assuming about 25,000 per LMD, and we had asked the board for 50,000 because the board had said, water quality matters to us, we wanna do something here. So there was that discussion. We said, here are some potential options. You could waive the 5,000 and this 50,000 can be used for that. You could require the 5,000 and you could supplement above the 5,000 to help with the formation. You could waive the 5,000 bond and front all of the costs for the LMD. So those were all of those options, and the board, through the discussion, you had supported, Commissioner Menzer, you threw out the require them to have the 5,000, but cover the exploration and formation costs in excess of the bond, and that's where the 10,000 came into play. Commissioner Mejia wanted to be able to cover things that come up, like what happened with Black Lake, and then you had a discussion that, well, the board just funded public health and social services in a program to cover some of that. And Commissioner Edwards said, well, if there's stuff that we can do just with helping healthy lakes, and so, just with helping our county lakes and water quality in our county lakes. And so the board approved the $10,000, and it was along the lines of this, you mentioned the section 1, like a subsection of 1, which says requiring the 5,000 bond, but covering exploration and formation costs in excess of the bond amount. If we have 2 LMDs come forward, $10,000 will not cover the excess for the formation, because it costs $10,000 to $12,000 per, and that's an estimate, right? That's an estimate.
And the exploration and formation cost comes before the petition, right?
Right.
So that is being done under
Correct.
the current funding. So we could expect, we have a draft petition from Moffett Lake in my inbox right now. So we expect the cost to be $10,000 to $24,000 if
We'd
2
estimate
petitions
25,
came
yeah.
forward.
Did that petition get submitted in October of 21 or
December.
December of 21?
For Patterson.
For Patterson? Okay.
So we don't need to decide anything about that money or what, I'm trying to figure out what's left for the board to decide, whether we're gonna let Patterson's petition go forward, whether we're gonna let Offit's petition go forward, and then we're gonna take up some more financial issues that Mr. Carmen raises at a later time. Is that where we're at?
Yeah,
And we
that
will
is
need
correct.
funding. We will need funding to
well,
manage
Yeah,
the.
we'll schedule a follow-up conversation based on all that information that you've received today. I think it's prudent for the board to think about everything what was discussed today, and then next meeting will be, I will ask a couple of questions at that time, if I may.
Okay. Any additional comments from anyone else?
I just want clarification. We're gonna talk about the existing LMDs, but then we're also still gonna talk about Patterson.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting emails about that as well. Okay.
Yes, so at the next, thank you. The next meeting, we're gonna dive into the comments that we received from Mr. Carmen yesterday related to the IT. I believe the $17,000. I think we need to.
I can draft a response.
Yeah.
for that.
Do you wanna dive into all of the comments, or do you just wanna dive
No,
into
just
IT?
that one, because I think it's the comment, I couldn't understand the comment, to be honest with you. I couldn't understand
Yeah.
what he was coming from. So I think hopefully we can schedule a follow-up in the next week or 2.
Okay.
And then ask the board if had any additional questions related to this, and at that point I will ask the board if they'd like to proceed with the next steps on the Patterson Lake petition.
Do we have a scheduled presentation by the Lakes Management folks? Kind of an educational piece coming? Do they have that on our schedule? I thought they were putting together something that was gonna kind of coincide with what the RCWs say, what the intent of that legislation is. Is water quality really a priority for us?
From the steering committee members?
Maybe from the steering.
I'm not aware of them presenting anything. What I am aware of, because I was forwarded an email, not because they shared it, that they were researching whether the $5,000 bond should be spent for the purpose that the county has been using it for. And they made some misassumptions in there, and they have had this rolling around in the communities. When I got the information, I forwarded it on to our legal counsel to verify that we were using the money appropriately. And the feedback that we got was, yes, the expectation of RCW 3661 is that the community pay for the full cost of formation.
Yes.
So that's the feedback we've got from legal. I don't know if they're ready to prepare a briefing on that or not.
That would be, except if we say, hey, let's put in
Of course.
25,000 out of general fund to make this work. for
Yeah,
water quality.
Travis's response was only the intent of the RCW.
Yeah, purview of the board.
Okay, it is 3:57. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
You ready for it?